Welcome to IT in Motion, where we'll make autonomous IT entertaining and informative. My name is Sun.
And I'm Josh. We're your hosts. Today we're talking to DJ, CIO of TDC Business. Everybody give it up for DJ.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for having me. Pleasure
DJ in the building. What does DJ stand for?
Good question. So my proper name is Douglas James. My first name is Douglas. My last name is James. But people seem to get confused. So a company we work with, TCS, years ago, they just said, this is so much easier. We'll just call you DJ. And that's just become my brand. It's stuck. So I'm really pleased with it.
Are you going to get like a chain with diamonds on it and says DJ on it?
No, I might do weddings. I'll let you know when I do it.
All right.
Love it.
So DJ, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, as you said, you know my name and title. So currently I'm in TDC Business, where my main role as CIO is to fully focus on our digital transformation, to give a better experience to our customers, and of course empower our talented teams.
All right. Well, excellent. We're going to do an icebreaker game here. And the idea is we're going to read some Danish idioms that have been translated into English. And you'll tell us what they mean and explain kind of how they're used. So we'll start with the first one. What does it mean if someone says to pat the horse?
Great. In Danish, it's called klap hesten, which means literally pat the horse. This is used to say, let's just keep calm, just calm down. This is a very, very Danish phrase.
Yeah.
All right.
Excellent.
All right. Next one is, it's blowing half a pelican.
Det blæser en hel pelikan. And that means it's really, really windy. It's bad weather.
All right.
Excellent. What does it mean to go cucumber?
This is a great one. This is incredibly Danish. Det går hele mok. Det går hele grok. It means to go crazy.
I love it. DJ's going cucumber.
I got to imagine at some point cucumbers are really expensive. It's like if you're going to go crazy, you're just going to go wild. You're going to go buy like 5 cucumbers and enjoy them.
That's funny.
Just imagine whoever started this podcast, they're now going, what on earth am I listening to? Please keep with us. It will get more serious.
Well, I'm curious, is that like generational? Like every generation uses, we go cucumber, or is it like it's an older generation phrase or younger generation phrase?
Generally speaking, they're phrases I hear each and every week. So it's coming. It depends where you come from in Denmark. If you're in the main capital, Copenhagen, and the islands, or in Jylland, then you might use some of the phrases a little bit more often. But this is common phrases.
All right. How about I feel like an egg yolk?
Yeah. Jeg har den som en blom i et æg. And it means I feel like I'm a yolk in an egg, which means I'm perfect. I'm happy. Everything's just as it should be.
Nice.
All right. Well, speaking of everything being just as it should be, can you tell us a little bit about your career history?
Sure. So I've lived in Denmark for 15 years. Before that, I was in the British Army, including a tour of Iraq and all the way back in 2005 as an infantry soldier. And that was one of the hardest but the best things I've done, a really solid foundation for the importance of strategy and execution and discipline. And then I was lucky enough to move to Denmark, where I got a job with IBM Denmark, where I was implementing changes on mainframes, learning a job control language. And that's where I just started getting interested in what my boss does and dialogue with the customers. And then I moved to a job called TDC Hosting, which was a smaller company under the current company I am now, which was also as a service delivery manager. So a lot of dialogue with the customers and helping fix things and coordinating with our teams. And then I was 3 years in ATIA, mainly focused on automation and leadership. And that's where things really started to take off, focusing on leadership. And then I moved to where I am now, which is formerly Net Design and has now been rebranded to TDC Erhverv, which means TDC Business, where it's fully focused on empowering our talented teams. So I definitely didn't get here by myself. I work with very talented people, and I'm very, very grateful.
That's so amazing. We're really looking forward to peeling back your stories of how you've gotten to where you are. It's so impressive. You're I think 39 or something. You're a CIO of this company. So it's really looking forward to especially your leadership stories. But you moved, it sounds like, from UK to Denmark, and that transition. What was that like? What brought you to Denmark?
My wife is the short answer. So we met each other in England.
Yeah,
so I have a love visa, which is hopefully won't expire. So I'm very pleased to be here. and the feeling was right. So I just went for the move after I got lucky enough to get this job offer. And Danes are lovely people. They're warm. Once you get to know them, it can be difficult to just break into these social circles. But like anything, if you take the time to study the culture and actually find out what's a good idea, what's the normal, and Danes are lovely. And learning the language is of course difficult. Everyone speaks English. In Denmark, mainly if it's the older generation, they can struggle a bit, but they still have basic fundamentals of English. But I don't need to speak Danish, but I've deliberately chosen to because I want to be fully integrated, and I can't lead effectively if I can't have dialogue in Danish at work with my teams in Denmark. And then we also have a team which I'm responsible for in Vilnius in Lithuania. So English and Danish is many companies in Denmark have a combination, which I think is very sensible.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? There's only probably less than 6 million Danish speakers in the world, so they've got to work with the rest of the world.
Yeah.
How did you find that transition going from, first the army and infantry, right? A very physical, tough job that's very demanding, requires tremendous discipline, to, it sounds like the sort of UK business world, and then from there further on into the Danish business world, right? Those are some major transitions. How did you find those transitions? How did you navigate through them?
By listening, I think was the biggest thing. So generally speaking, you mentioned my title. It's a nice title to have. I suppose technically it's a business unit CIO, but Danes generally aren't that bothered about people's titles. It's quite an American thing of being a senior vice president or a CIO, and they basically will think, well, what does this person do, and how can I use them, and how can they help me? So it's more on merit based, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Compared to the army, in the British Army, I'm not sure what it's like in the American Army, but generally speaking, you'd be given an instruction, and 9 times out of 10 you would say yep. So I can remember being back in the British Army, and I would ask, why are we doing this? And my sergeant would say, I don't pay you to ask questions, I pay you to do what I tell you.
Right.
And in theory he's right. It's a totally different system
Yeah.
in the British Army, at least when I was there. And you can't do that in Denmark, which I think is a positive thing. So you have to focus to say, hey, can you please do this for me, because it's important to our customer with this deadline, which I think is a good idea, to ask why and be challenged on the status quo. So there's a difference, and the biggest difference, if anyone Brits are listening to this, is the pub culture. Without sounding like an alcoholic, it's an extremely British culture to go for a pint every now and again and chat. And in Denmark, we do it differently. We celebrate something called hygge, which means comfy, cozy, and that's generally they'll eat at each other's houses. And in England, it's very normal to go out and eat in a pub or a nice restaurant and have a beer, and so things like that. But then again, I try to mix things. So if I do some team building with my team, we'll swing by a good pub on the way to do something. So you can meet in the middle to get a really good result.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So through that transition, what have you learned from leading people from other cultures? So what are the biggest takeaways?
For me, I mean, that's a big question. What's a good leader? But I think it's always listening to the why. It's not the army, like I said. And the authoritarian part of it is you have to earn the respect from people, which I think is a good thing. But generally speaking, for good leadership, I've tried to think about what's the easy way. So to remember it. So I've done the 3 P's and the 3 L's. So the 3 P's for me, this is my personal opinion, would be passion, perspective, and persistence. You have to be passionate about leadership if you're going to be a leader. Being a leader is about having influence, no matter what the title or the role is. And you can have influence without having a leadership position. But to be passionate about something, especially for people, you have to believe it. Because if it's just a normal 9 to 5 job, being a leader is difficult. It's challenging.
Yeah.
Especially today after Corona and the crisis, everyone's trying to do more with less people. It's an exciting transformation, but having the passion is important. The perspective, I mean, keeping calm. You said before, clap, hiss, and clap the horse. In the grand scheme of things, if you're listening to this today, you probably have a pretty good life compared to what's happening in other places. The tragedy of what's happening in Ukraine, we have a good life. So it's good to have perspective on the way home, to take a breath and say, we'll start again tomorrow. We'll get through it. So I think perspective is a big part of my philosophy, and persistence. If it was easy, we probably already would have done it. So a lot of the stuff I work with together with my teams, it's big, complicated stuff. we're trying to change the way people work on a daily basis, the way our customers consume our services, and the only way you can do it is just by breaking it down into smaller parts. So I've heard the phrase, how do you eat an elephant? In small bites. You have to take small chunks, and then it's obtainable. But this is not easy stuff, but it's a lovely challenge to have as a leader.
Sure. You said there's the 3 Ps, the passion, persistence, and perspective, and then you said there are 3 Ls.
3 Ls.
Yes. So the 3 Ls, again, this is my personal opinion or my experience, is to lead. Make sure you're the one that's leading. So my personal style, which I think I'm good at, is doing servant-based leadership. Servant-based leadership for me is making sure I'm going in front of the team and I'm helping solve issues, knowing when to step in, knowing when to step back so they can perform. But I'm focused on my team. Why? Because I don't need to say, I've done this, I've done this. If I can say, we've done this, we've accomplished this, if I empower my team, the results will come by themselves. So that's my view of leading, being a strong leader. And then learning or listening is the second one, because the amount of time people pretend to listen are not actually listening. If you think about it, when you're in most meetings, you're really, even if it's subconscious, you're only hearing half the conversation of what you want to get the yes or the no from the person. And I think as a leader, the best thing we can do is sometimes step back and say, what is it that we're trying to achieve and why are we doing it? And actually understand and dare to ask a question. I don't quite understand what we're trying to achieve. Can you please explain it to me? So listening's a really important one. And the last one is love people. Loving people. Everyone's going through something in life, and our job, what we're doing today, is part of our lives. But you could be going through some stuff that's got to do with your family. You could be through a stressful situation, and giving the people the flexibility and having an open dialogue with them about what do you need from me right now and how can we work this out. You have to be passionate about people if you're going to be a good people leader. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I'm actually reading the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, and he talks about level 5 leaders a whole lot. So a lot of what you have described it mirrors that, especially that servant leadership mentality going into, supporting a team as opposed to telling them what to do and where to go, and then you sit back and and just manage from that way, that authoritative way.
But that's the difference between leadership and management, in my opinion. Management is still a very important issue. So there's still things I have to do as a leader, which is to do salary reviews, performance, compliance. I'm really pleased that our company's invested in diversity training. That's really good to always be learning about. Everyone has a cognitive bias. I think it's very good to learn more about awareness of how people don't have the same kind of views, whether it's their faith, their religion, or their upbringing. The more diverse team you have, the better results you can do together. So that's something I'm also learning as a new leader. So I think that's really good, and I fully support that.
Yeah.
But yeah, management is part of the task. The rest is actually leading the way to say, hey, let's go this way, and taking the team with you.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like for you, a huge part of being a good leader is about kind of listening, understanding, and bringing people along because they want to follow, not because you're telling them they have to.
Absolutely. Because so short term, so if we talk about the difference between stress and pressure, so pressure is okay when you explain to your teams why something needs to be done and we're in it together, but then it should be over a specific period of time, right? So we're going through internal audits and all this stuff, and having very focused on closing off a good second part of the year, and all these things are important. But you can't expect people to give 180% every day for a year straight. It's just not possible. And if you do it, it starts to affect the culture and your employees to be stressed. So pressure has to be managed. And the way you do that is talk to your teams. And sometimes it's limiting your teams to say, you have 25 things to do. I only need you to focus on these 3 things. The rest I'll take, but just get these things done. Because otherwise, even myself, if I don't have conversations with my boss or others, there's only so much we can absorb as people.
Yeah, so it's again, right? It's that human type of leadership where you're treating the person not as a machine to produce work, but as a person who needs rest and needs encouragement and needs context.
Absolutely.
What would you say? Would you say that that's part of the formula to empower a team to kind of drive towards that purpose? What are the other components to empowering a team?
Again, based on my experience, sometimes people are very good at saying what they need, but as a leader, I think you have to try to be good at listening, like I said, of when to step in and say this is getting too much. I'm going to help you, and not see it as a negative thing to say you can't handle that much more right now. Because there's new stuff comes in. I'm sure it's very similar in your business. New stuff's coming in all the time,
Yeah.
and we're trying to finish one big project, and then another big project comes in, and everything's important. Everything has to be done tomorrow, and that's simply not possible. So our role as leaders is to manage our people the best we can, and do the best we can with the resources, or ask for more resources, or ask for a different set of conditions to do it. But I think empowering the team, to specifically answer your question, is knowing when to step in, knowing when to get out of the way, and also asking your team to have the ability that it's okay to say no. It's not a weakness to say, I cannot do this week, I have to do this other task. And I think if you don't talk about that openly enough, then people get worried about, is it bad that I'm saying no? Can I spend time with my family? Everything's a balance. You talked about the difference between Danish culture and, for example, British culture. Is there's a very good work-life balance in Denmark. So people, of course, always work extra if you ask them. There's lots of unions involved, so it gets quite complicated. But I always try to give people the flexibility. You give me something, I'll give you something. And generally speaking, as long as we get the tasks done, I'm very flexible when people log in and log out, as long as they get the task done. We do try to promote more and more people being in the office after Corona, at least 3 days a week. And that's the thing, again, everyone's learning. No one's been through Corona before Corona. So every employee, every leader is going through these changes together.
Absolutely. It sounds like that type of flexibility is really important in how you lead. You've talked a little bit about that. Is there any other things about flexibility you want to call out as important?
I think I'm trying to help teams, as I said before, of being as flexible as possible. So people that have families, things have to be right at home to be right at work. It's connected.
Yeah.
We have to stop seeing home as one thing and work as separate. So if everything's going great in the office, what's happening at home is irrelevant, and that it's the complete opposite. Everything's connected, and giving the people the opportunity to say, I'm going to work from home today, I'm going to go through all the reporting or do this task, I just need to be on my own, that's fine. So I truly believe you can have, I've heard like this, said like this, that you can have control or growth, but you can't have both. If I'm going to start micromanaging my team, they're going to start asking why. It's not effective. I haven't met anyone in 15 years of being in Denmark or any other country that goes, I'd love to be micromanaged, please do so. And I think people do it because people are stressed, and that stress should be handled in another way of saying, what do you need from me to be successful, instead of micromanaging people. So don't micromanage people.
Yeah, micromanagement often is a sign of low trust, right? You don't trust the people are motivated, capable, smart enough, whatever it is, and so you have to tell them exactly what to do. Maybe you think your way is the only way, and you haven't developed the trust that maybe people can develop a way that works for them or works better than your way.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So, how do you encourage productive work over busy work?
That's a great question. I think there's a big difference between being busy and being productive. I think clearly define the scope of what you're working on. That's a classic sign of a good idea happens, and that's the easy part, having a good idea, and then actually implementing that is usually a completely different process. And what I see is normally a push and pull struggle of, let's just get it done, because we don't want to go through the whole formal process of business case and defining what works, and we just want to build as we go. And that is possible and a good idea in some scenarios, but if you're not going to think the whole way through as the perspective of how is this actually going to affect what our customers buy and what we do, I do think we're quite good at that. We're getting better, but just to think the whole thing through of, okay, what's happening with the resources, when do I have time to do it, just again, by stopping and asking the right questions to make sure we're covering our bases. And if you've done that, 9 times out of the 10, the team will solve the issues themselves, or they'll come to their leader or me and say, this, we need help with this, please help. And then it's important we solve that issue for them, otherwise they wouldn't ask.
Well, I was going to say, as it relates to that, when you were talking, I was thinking it is important to think the end goal in mind. And so a lot of times people use like 18-month roadmaps as like kind of that staple, or maybe like 18 months and then 5 years, 10 years, and then what's the first MVP, right? And just kind of like aligning the micro with that macro outlook. I mean, what are the common practices that you typically do to ensure that you see the whole North Star within the short-term tactical goals that you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, Great question. Again, like I said, it's try to break it down. So we have long-term strategies, like any other company, 3 years, 5 years, how we help maintain and improve our business. But you have to make it relevant. So I work on the strategy with my boss, but then my boss explains it how it's relevant for what I'm involved in, and then I have to explain it to my team how it's relevant for them. And ultimately, how does this make a difference to the daily stuff that I'm doing? Because if you don't make it relevant, it's natural that people go, yeah, I've heard this before. Let's wait 3 months and then we'll start a new project. So
Right.
it's just making the success as visible as possible. I think is probably a key. And then on the flip side is also discussing when things aren't going well. We need to be able to have an open conversation to say, this is what we expected, this didn't happen, and this is the changes we're putting in place. But you can't just talk about the positive. And I think that's an important thing as a leader.
Yeah, so you're kind of driving at this idea of feedback, right? You've start out with this business case, this idea you want to build, and a strategy that it fits into, and then you let it out into the world, and or maybe before it even gets out into the world, you see that it is or isn't going well. How do you incorporate feedback into that overall process?
I think it's really important to ask people for honest feedback.
Mm-hmm.
But when I say that, if you ask someone for feedback, you can't be offended if it's the feedback you don't want to hear. So
Yeah.
I'm very honest, and sometimes I think that's got me in trouble. If someone asks me, "What do you think of this?" I'll phrase something politely if I don't agree. But I'm not here to just to say what people want to hear. I'm here to actually help empower my teams and see some possible errors and avoid it. I like the analogy of a train wreck. You can see a train going full speed and you know it's going to crash. Well, you can't just sit there and go, well, let's see what happens. You need to be able to say to the driver, you need to stop the train. And it's the same here. Don't be afraid to call it out. And I think some people are afraid of, and I can understand this. I've been in this situation where if I point out 5 things of what hasn't been done, someone might perceive me as being negative to say, well, of course he's going to say that. Let's just get on with it. And it's a sensible balance, but you shouldn't be afraid to have feedback, but you should be prepared to have, if you're going to ask, be prepared to hear something that you don't like. So I try to. Again, I'm no by any means a perfect leader. I hope no one's listening to this thinking this guy's got it all done, and I'm far from it. I fail each and every day, and that's how I learn. And I just don't want to make the same mistakes more than twice, like anyone else. But I try to ask my direct managers and their teams more or less every 2 or 3 one-to-ones, so at least once a quarter. Is there anything you would like me to do differently? And that takes confidence, that takes
Yep.
vulnerability. And some people say, no, that's fine. And other people say, you know what, I'm glad you asked. There was this case last week, and what you said annoyed me because. And then often they'll say, is there anything you'd like me to do differently? So just having that vulnerability. Not everyone takes the opportunity, which is fine. But if I don't ask, how can I expect an honest answer? And that's what I think leadership is about. Then you'll start getting different results. Because if you do the same, you get the same.
You know, I love that you use the word vulnerability because what I've found is, and maybe you can share your story with us, but vulnerability can potentially lead to positive culture change among each other because it builds trust, right? So can you tell us a little bit about, I mean, people that probably know you probably know that you've created a lot of culture change within the organizations that you've had. I mean, tell us about that journey a little bit, right? That vulnerability, how was that component infused into it? What else was involved in that formula?
Yeah, I try to make what's relevant from my life into the workplace. It doesn't have to be that everyone agrees with my opinion, but as simple as sharing what you've been doing at a weekend. Some people are very closed off of this is my job, 9 to 5, and that's fine. But when you're by the coffee machine and you're talking to people, what did you do at the weekend? Sometimes it's small talk, but sometimes people actually care. How's it going, or what do you need help with? And again, work and home life is very, very much related. So I suppose a small thing I had a while back is recently in the last 2 weeks was a potential health scare. So I had to go to the hospital to get a scan to see to make sure that I didn't have colon cancer, and that wasn't a very nice experience. Luckily, I don't have colon cancer, which is I'm very very pleased about. And I told my direct management team, and now everyone knows. But why would I hide it? I think it's good to say, listen, I'm not in the office this day. I have to have a procedure. I'll let you
Yeah.
know how it goes, and then sat down and say I've been through this, and luckily, God forbid, nothing was wrong. But that's my chance to share a real life story with people, because that's how you connect. That's how you learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's That kind of transparency about what's going on in your life and that ability to connect with others really does make a difference, right? My experience working with people, when you have the more personal the connection you have with the people you're working with, the easier it is to work together, the more you enjoy the time that you spend working together. And it's one of the things that transforms work from being, something you're dreading on Monday morning to something where you're like, you know what, this is going to be a good day, right? I'm working with, this morning, right? I'm working with Sun. We're going to have a fun day talking to some interesting people, and it makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was curious, for it's easy to empower a team when people are open and they're honest and whatnot, but we always run into characters that aren't, right? Those difficult characters. As a leader, how do you overcome that?
It depends on the situation. We were at some training the other week talking about, I think more or less everyone can relate to this, I think. So have you ever come into the office and said good morning to someone and they haven't said good morning back? I've experienced that. I don't know about you. And then without even talking to the person, in your head, you start going through, well, he just must be angry or upset. He or she must be grumpy. Or you can just keep going and saying, well, maybe it's something I've done, or, well, that's his problem, I'm not going to help him. So over 50% of conflicts in the workplace, the other person who's potentially in this conflict has no idea that you have a problem with that person. Over 50%. So the only way you'll solve that is to say, oh, I said good morning to you the other day. You didn't reply. Is everything all right? Oh, and it could be a number of scenarios that, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even hear you say good morning, or I'm really involved in a case right now. It could be, I was just grumpy. I didn't feel like saying hello. So but it very rarely it's personal. But that, I think, is again and more often than not, people. I haven't met anyone yet that goes to work in mindset wise and says, I'm going to have a rubbish day today. It doesn't happen. Why would anyone want a rubbish day? And normally it's because someone's frustrated with a certain issue and it just spirals out of control if something isn't fixed. And that can only be solved by an open dialogue. And like I say quite a lot is to my team, if you don't tell me about it, I might not know about it. So I'm quite intuitive. I ask what's going on, or I try to get a good sense if something's off. But there'll be stuff in the organization that I don't hear about. And if I don't hear about it, or I don't ask the right questions, how on earth can I fix it? And that's across the whole organization. So encouraging an open dialogue is by far the best, but also sometimes the most difficult part of the job, because there's always going to be problems. We're not going to have a perfect workplace, and it's how you address it, I think, is important.
Leaning into that pain, totally. Especially with the most difficult of peoples, it's like, get the fights and all the stuff out in front, put everything out in front, and then afterwards nothing's as bad, right? You've already gone through it, right? So tell us, does technological transformation need to be mirrored by a cultural one within an organization?
I absolutely think so. I can't see how we'll completely change the way we work without changing the culture. So a perfect example here is this great, what people are calling the Great Resignation. So due to Corona, again, no one's ever been through this before before Corona, which is it's natural that a lot of people have looked back and said, okay, in some cases people were at home for literally 2 whole years, I think it was in Australia. But a lot of people were working from home, and then it's natural you start reflecting over your career to say, is it the right time to try something new, or should I stay where I am? And more often than not, it's not about salary. In some cases it is, but more often than not, it's because the person wants just to try something different.
Mm-hmm.
So culturally wise, without saying some specific company names, some of the biggest companies in America have already said you must be in the office 5 days a week, or else. And that's especially in Denmark and Europe. A lot of news has been okay. That's quite a hardcore rule to have in place.
Yeah.
I don't think, and I'll just say it, I don't think within the next 5 years most offices will go back to full time in the office, and most companies. I think it'll be standard to have a 3-day work week from the office, and then there's 1 or 2 flex days. And I think that's totally okay as long as we get the results that we need, because I want to trust my team.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, ScienceLogic was already doing that sort of approach in engineering prior to the pandemic. It was pretty normal for someone to work from home 1 or maybe 2 days a week and be in the office the other days. So I think this is something that maybe accelerated a transition that was already happening at a lot of companies. And the companies that were already doing that sort of stuff, I think, had a much easier transition into 2020 than the companies that weren't.
But we saw that productivity could still stay pretty high, even though we do work from home. And I don't know, this is just my experience, but working at home, actually, I get more done than when I'm in the office. And now, that being said, there's value in going to the office because when you're doing planning sessions or ideating or things of that nature with your team in person with a whiteboard, there's nothing that I could to replace that in the technology. Even a digital whiteboard is not the same experience as that level of collaboration.
I completely agree. And if you think about it, the flip side is a lot of people can be how effective we were didn't actually increased, I would argue, slightly, especially in my team when we were all forced to work from home. But generally speaking, you're taking more calls because you can't say, hey, excuse me, Dan, or can you solve this, because you have to ring. That's one thing. But then you can't change the culture when everyone's working from home. The culture is in the office, and the values of meeting people and talking and having a breakfast or a meal or celebrating people with if they've been working here so many years, 10, 15, 20 years, that is not the same just working from home. So I think it has to be a sensible balance from a leadership perspective to say, it's not a case of if you want to come in the office, but I would very much like you to come in the office 3 days a week. We can be flexible. My approach is we can be flexible which days it is, because I want to ensure we build up the culture. Because the worst case is if I say we should do that and then other leaders say, I'm not, you can do what you want. And then the people that come in the office say, well, that was worth an hour and a trip in the car. I'm in the office by myself. Why have I wasted 1 hour? So it's a sensible balance. Either you do it together, all in, or you don't do it.
Yeah. And it also actually breaks up the silos between the different departments too, because what I've found is when we went into full remote, we were stuck within the Teams meetings that we were invited to, usually within the organization that we fell into: product, marketing, finance, sales, whatever it may be. Now, that water cooler conversation was that magic area where, you know, we would all meet in the kitchen or go out to lunch, and we would learn about what's happening in the different departments to reduce maybe redundancies that might actually be happening in those different places, right?
Yeah, well, let's talk about something that most people don't talk about. So if you're ever in a situation in a company, and this happens to all companies, when business goes well, you employ more people, and sometimes if business doesn't go well, you unfortunately have to make some redundancies. One of the first times I directly had to unfortunately make someone redundant was during Corona. And I think as a leader, you should always be moved if you have to perform redundancies. You know, we're changing people's lives, sometimes, hopefully, mostly for the better, and sometimes, unfortunately, there's redundancies. And one of the first times I made someone redundant was during Corona. It was over a Teams call, and the person didn't have their video on. I had my video on, so I was talking to a blank screen to say, unfortunately, we have to make you redundant. And that's a horrible experience, but it had to happen, unfortunately. But it makes me realize how fortunate I am to do this job, to try to avoid any form of redundancy. It's not always possible, but I want really good results. To employ more people is my ultimate goal. But having the bad times puts perspective into having the good times.
Absolutely. Well, DJ, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. If people want to learn more about you or your ideas, how do they reach out to you?
I'm all over LinkedIn, or write me. I love to know what people think. I want things to be as interactive as possible. So if you can find me on LinkedIn, Douglas James or DJ Denmark. If you search, I'll come up. Or if you're seeing this on a social media post, write a comment and I'll be happy to reply. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for listening.
Everybody give it up for DJ. Thanks for joining us, DJ. Have a wonderful.
Thanks, take care.
Thank
and remember,
you.
Clap the horse.
All right.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Take care.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please hit the subscribe button. We're available on Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and many other podcast platforms. We release new episodes on a regular basis. You can find more about our podcast at sciencelogic.com/podcast.